Hi, everybody. Welcome. You are at the Energy Communities Alliance webinar, Open for Business, New Nuclear. And I am Laura Hermann. I'm the Deputy Executive Director, and I'm really excited to bring you this conversation today. We are going to be discussing the future of nuclear and really looking at where we have the new projects underway. We're going to be looking at the role local communities play in that. And there is always this sort of undercurrent of discussion around if and when we're in the nuclear renaissance. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and give perspectives from both the local level as well as from the Beltway on where we are in that nuclear deployment initiative that has gotten a lot of attention in recent years and months. And first, I want to recognize Dr. Michael Goff, who is the Acting Director and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Office of Nuclear Energy at DOE. Thank you, Dr. Goff, for joining us. And
happy to be here.
We're really happy to have you here to get the perspective from DOE. In addition to having Dr. Goff here to give us some opening remarks and get this conversation kicked off, we have John Kotek, who's a Senior Vice President for Policy and Public Affairs at the Nuclear Energy Institute. We have Diahann Howard, who's the Executive Director from the Port of Benton in Washington State. Chuck Hope is a City Councilor from the City of Oak Ridge in Tennessee. And we have Clifford, who's the Senior Science and Economics Correspondent from Cipher News. And for those of the folks on the call today who are watching from many of the nuclear companies that have been started, you probably met Kat in her reporting over the years. She's done a great job getting to know all of the companies in the space. The full bios of everybody on our webinar today are available on the Energy Communities Alliance website under the Open for Business webinar bios. So if you want more information, you'll find everybody on LinkedIn and as well as on our website. But first, I wanted to welcome and thank Dr. Goff for making time out of a very busy time at the Department of Energy as we get ready for this energy transition and putting nuclear energy firmly in the mix. And Dr. Goff, did you have slides today? Or you're just speaking?
I'm just speaking, if that's okay.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So with that in mind, then I will go ahead and welcome you and let you tell us a little bit more from your perspective as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at DOE and the Acting Director. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on what's going on in new nuclear today.
Okay. Well, hello to everyone out there. Let me first say, yeah, it is a pleasure to join you to discuss new nuclear opportunities. As Laura noted, it is a busy time in the Department of Energy, so happy to be here and apologize I can only be here at the start. But I should note, it's just a busy time in the nuclear space, period, not just at DOE. So I'd like to start by thanking the Energy Community Alliance for organizing this webinar and bringing us together at such an exciting and really critical time for nuclear energy. I will note I had the honor of providing remarks at last year's ECA New Nuclear Forum, so I'm excited to share some updates. The Trump administration does have a bold and ambitious agenda to unleash American energy at home and abroad to restore the nation's energy dominance. And a key component of that strategy is to unleash commercial nuclear power in the United States. In the Office of Nuclear Energy, we are working to grow the supply of affordable, reliable, and secure American energy. Specifically, we are working diligently to enable the rapid deployment and export of next-generation nuclear technology. We're working to bring down the operating costs for existing reactors to make nuclear energy more affordable for the American people. We're looking to expand the application of nuclear energy beyond electricity to support manufacturing and industry in the United States. And we're looking to strengthen our nuclear fuel infrastructure to keep our nation's energy supply secure. To make that happen, that is to succeed in delivering energy abundance and economic prosperity to Americans, we need a strong community partnerships and state support. So these activities like this are very important. Existing energy communities know how important this work is. and they know the role of energy infrastructure can play in the economic prosperity of a community when there's strong partnership with that local community. For those communities considering new nuclear projects, let me tell it to you straight now. Now really is the time to start being involved in the nuclear business. To quote Secretary Wright, Americans' nuclear energy renaissance starts now. Last week, DOE reissued a $900 million solicitation to support the deployment of Generation 3 Plus light water small modular reactors. This funding will help spur first mover teams to deploy the first Generation 3 Plus SMRs in the United States. And really, it hopefully will help establish an order book for follow-on deployments by addressing gaps that have hindered the domestic nuclear industry, such as final design, licensing, supplier development, and site preparation. We're also working to support other advanced SMR designs through the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. Our investment in these advanced technologies is bearing fruit as the developers make significant progress toward deployment. Just this week, Dow submitted a construction permit application to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to build a 4-unit XE100 plant in Texas in partnership with the ARDP awardee, X-Energy. Last year, TerraPower, the other ARDP demonstration project, submitted their construction permit. So now we have both of the demonstration projects from the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. And I should note, both of these are Generation 4 technologies, now have permits before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for construction. We're also very happy in January that Kairos Power completed the fabrication and installation of their reactor vessel for their engineering test unit, which is being built to help advance the deployment of their fluoride salt-cooled high-temperature reactor. And they already have their commercial application to move forward on that construction in the Tennessee of that prototype. So SMRs can expand the application of nuclear energy technology. They can bring nuclear energy projects to the greater range of communities, and they can support rapidly growing power needs, especially those related to data centers. And nuclear power really does play a key role in empowering data centers, which could offer really important opportunities for communities that are interested in co-location of these technologies. Data centers really do require 24/7 firm energy to operate with extreme uptimes and the highest levels of reliability. In general, downtime at a data center can cost as much as $8 million a day in lost revenue. And nuclear power plants can provide the reliable electricity, and this is like 5 nines reliable electricity to provide the reliable energy that those data centers need. And additionally, smaller reactors can also provide grid independence for security critical AI data centers and military infrastructure. To that end, the Department of Energy is also working to speed the commercialization of microreactors. At our National Reactor Innovation Center, or NRIC, we're developing a new test bed called DOME to speed up microreactor development. In fact, the incredible host community around the Idaho National Laboratory was instrumental in saving the old experimental breeder reactor 2 containment structure, which we have now repurposed to be DOME for testing microreactors, and thereby actually lessening overall environmental footprint associated with this testing and saving the companies money in the process as far as reducing their overall costs and reducing project risk as well. So currently we have both Westinghouse and Radiant are working to complete their front-end engineering design studies in partnership with the Department of Energy to potentially test the first fueled reactor experiments under DOE authorization in that DOME test bed. We hope to begin some of that testing as early as the 2026 timeframe. So this is really, a lot of exciting developments occurring right now in the nuclear space. We also are seeing progress on historic restarts of nuclear power plants as well. And we were very happy that Secretary Wright did announce the second loan disbursement to Holtec this past week for the restart of the Palisades nuclear plant. This released an additional $57 million to support America's first restart of a commercial nuclear reactor that has ceased operations. This project will hopefully help retain 600 high-quality American jobs in Michigan and provide 800 megawatts of affordable, reliable energy. Many states and communities have already recognized the important role of nuclear projects, what they can provide to the offering families and businesses affordable, reliable, and secure energy, and also providing high-paying jobs, increased tax revenues, and good economic activity already. We're excited about a lot of the developments that are occurring around the country, like in Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, just to name a few. So I apologize if I left off your state, because yeah, there's just a lot going on in this space. Which is why the Office of Nuclear Energy remains committed to partnering with national groups that work on state energy policy, such as we do a significant amount of work with the National Governors Association, which this year offered in-state retreats to advance nuclear energy policy and provide technical assistance for specific nuclear projects. We work with the National Legislative Working Group, which is managed by the National Conference of State Legislatures. We work with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and finally also with the National Association of State Energy Officials, which just launched a multi-state collaboration called the Advanced Nuclear First Mover Initiative, which is aimed at expediting new nuclear deployment. So many new nuclear developers are also noting the importance of working at state and local levels to help keep their reactor projects on track for commercial deployment. We note that, like, one example is Oklo, which has a site permit use for demonstrating their deploying their reactor at Idaho National Laboratory, is doing extensive field work with the community to work to bring in community support in the Idaho region. But they're also working with the local tribes, including the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, again, to make sure that they're having the support that's really needed for these critical projects to make sure that you can minimize delays and risks to the projects. So finally, I'd like to briefly mention our important work on the international front. I know ECA is already carrying out important work with communities internationally. As global demand continues to grow, America must lead in the commercialization of affordable and abundant nuclear energy. I just came back from the UK, where a number of John's colleagues were there. Was there with industry partners from the Nuclear Energy Institute, where they were having a trade delegation meeting with the UK and then eventually with the Netherlands. I was there for the first 2 days. It was a really successful meeting as far as engagement. And I highlight that because this is really, we have a continued need for technical and information exchanges on these topics, both, again, the technical level, but also on the community levels as far as lessons learned and all as well. Because I should stress, we need these order books for these advanced technologies. And that's not just the domestic order book. We can benefit to get quickly from first of a kind to nth of a kind by deployments internationally as well, because those all help bring down the overall cost. So again, I'd like to thank ECA for the opportunities you've helped created through these partnerships. And again, apologize, I'm going to have to skip out. I know you're going to have a good discussion here this afternoon, and I know you'll have a great meeting in Idaho later in the month. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Goff. I'm really glad that you mentioned the National Association of State Energy Organizations. They have a terrific map of all the state level initiatives underway. And the companies that you've mentioned today, many of them will be joining us in Idaho at our new nuclear forum to showcase the individual projects and their individual technologies that they have underway. So really appreciate you joining us. I know you are squeezing this in a really busy agenda for you this week. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Look forward to it as well. Have a good rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great. Thanks. That's great. We really appreciate Dr. Goff making time today. This was he literally squeezed this into his agenda between things. So really great to get the conversation started at that top level from the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. As I said, the companies that Dr. Goff was talking about are just some of the many that have projects underway in the United States right now. And it's a really exciting time. I think he also really captured how it is the people and the partnerships and the public trust that are going to make this new generation of advanced nuclear deployments possible. And so with that, I want to shift to our panel today and have a little bit more commentary on what is the state of nuclear. I want to remind all of our audience members that we do have a Q&A function that is active for this meeting. So we'll focus on the Q&A in the last half hour of the session today. But if you have questions while we are having this discussion, feel free to enter those into the Q&A section, and we'll be monitoring that, and I'll be working those into our conversation. I think the comments are on as well, the chat functions. So there's a little bit of back and forth there if there are resources we can share. And finally, I want to remind everybody that this is being recorded and the full discussion will be available on the ECA YouTube channel in the next week or so with those additional resources. So with that, let's start with the big picture. Dr. Goff, I think, gave us a good overview, but John, maybe you can start for us from the NEI perspective. Where are we in terms of American commercial projects today? And when do we think the first SMRs will be operating?
With respect to American commercial projects, we of course have several underway, and I think a lot more to come. Of course, you need to start with the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program projects. So the TerraPower project in Wyoming, which has started the non-nuclear side of their construction and is awaiting a construction permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which they expect to receive next year to start building the nuclear side of the plant. X-Energy, of course, and Dow just submitted their construction permit application to the NRC. There are several other projects that have broken ground. You look at things like the Kairos, Hermes, and Hermes 2 projects in the state of Tennessee. I'm sure Chuck is going to talk some about those. Any number of microreactor projects underway here in the U.S. And then, importantly, just to our north, the effort by Ontario Power Generation to build the GE Hitachi SMR at their site. And so quite a number of projects underway. A growing number of utilities in the U.S. have new nuclear in their integrated resource plans. And so companies like Duke, Dominion, TVA, and a host of others have indicated their intent to go forward with new nuclear. In fact, when we surveyed our members a year or so ago, they expressed an interest in building about another 100 gigawatts of new nuclear by the 2050s. So think, roughly doubling the existing fleet. And our members only represent a little less than half the generation on the U.S. grid. So you can see where there's room for a lot more than that in terms of new nuclear. So quite a number of projects underway. I do expect to see more coming down the road. There's some hurdles we got to get over before we see the truly widespread scale of construction that I ultimately expect to see. And then with respect to your question about when, it'll be in the next couple of years, you'll start seeing fission from advanced reactors. Now, those might be microreactors. Those are, a shorter pathway to operation than some of the SMRs. But our friends in Canada plan on having their project up and running by the end of the decade. TerraPower is in that same ballpark. So it's not going to be too far down the road before you're going to see multiples of these in operation.
Great. Thanks, John. Diahann, I'd like to shift to you because you have a different perspective coming from the Port of Benton, being a longtime resident of Richland, Washington, where nuclear has had a footprint for many, many years. How do you see the landscape changing, and where do you see it from the vantage point in Washington State?
Thank you, Laura. In our region, we've actually been collaborating and laying the groundwork for the collective clean energy future for our vision for us since 2009. And we actually probably have 2 or 3 versions before that, to be quite honest. For myself, it's evolved with the coalition that we've created called Vertical Innovation Cluster. It's a state of Washington-led international economic development model, and the Port of Benton helped launch that in 2022. For us, that coalition's engaged across the Northwest, so Washington, Idaho, Wyoming. We're really working to create an industry-led ecosystem to shore up our domestic supply chain and solve other energy challenges that could really hinder wide-scale deployment of these next-generation nuclear technologies in the U.S. The other piece that's kind of played in for us on that is also the state of Washington's Clean Energy Transformation Act. It's really provided some alignment, and it really helped us promote industry collaboration across the and progress across. So we've got a lot of activity right now going on in our community and in this space. And another way with the port has been a part of helping advance the new nuclear power agenda in Washington is through the reuse of Department of Energy lands that was transferred in 2016, about 1,600 acres. It's now owned by the Port of Benton, the City of Richland, and Energy Northwest. Part of our vision was make this home to the Northwest Advanced Clean Energy Park to support that new nuclear supply chain and accelerate advanced clean energy projects. And to date, of that 1,600 acres, I'd say there's only about 300 acres left, 300 to 500 acres left. We have about $4.5 billion in projects and over 1,000 jobs. A couple of highlights of those: Atlas Agro, Pacific Green Fertilizer Plant, about $1.5 million project, also part of the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. We also have industrial symbiosis that's taking place. Potato chip manufacturer wants to use that industrial process heat potentially to make potato chips right here, also in the ag region of the state of Washington. We have Tushi Energy, which is a solar project of about 125 megawatts. And then the city of Richland has done a fantastic job, and they're working with Washington Energy, which is a potential enrichment project, about a $3 billion project. Then in addition to all of that, to the south, we're seeing a lot of things kind of gear up. ATI has an expansion project of 28 million. Framatome has an expansion project of 39 million in addition to winning the DOE contract on deconversion in HALEU. And then we also have a $30 million expansion of Seattle-based Avalanche Energy, which is a fusion company that's moving in here to Richland. So port hat on, what we're doing is ensuring that we're readying our infrastructure, our rail, our barge facilities to meet this industry demand that's coming. Because as was mentioned, this is not just a domestic play, this is a global play for the nation. And we also want to continue to support in addition to the value-added ag, the next generation of all nuclear technologies.
That's great, Diane. Thanks so much. Whenever you talk about vertical, it reminds me of the old lore about the fire chief who had a bucket brigade throwing single buckets of water on a woodshed fire until he organized everybody to take all of their buckets from the bucket brigade and throw it on the woodshed at one time. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we're finally figuring out how to bring that full ecosystem of a local economy together to make these things happen. So it's really exciting what you guys have going on in Washington. And Chuck, I think it mirrors what's happening in Tennessee as well. You could share with us a little bit about where you've been, like Diane, working on these issues for a long time, and this momentum that we see in the headlines that look like something new is afoot. They've been a long time coming, haven't they?
They really have. I mean, our start with a lot of this starts, several decades ago when the DOE decided to finish and complete the cleanup at the old K-25 site, which is now called Heritage Center. It gave us the capability and the area to really go out and start to recruit this. The open for business, that started with me probably 2 years ago now at Paducah. I walked in with a $3 open sign that I found at a hardware store, and and just brought that forward. And it really was the mentality that we have here in Oak Ridge, the collaborative effort between many different sources, not just the city and not just DOE, but a lot of different community leaders, both county and city, that have really stepped forward to say, yes, Oak Ridge is here. We have the workforce, we have the technology, and how do we make sure that everybody understands open for business? One of the approaches that we're taking here with a lot of our community and state leaders is it's not just a particular one type of technology or one type of project, but it's more a holistic approach at the whole outfit. The materials, the composite materials that you're going to need, the advanced materials you're going to need for any of these projects, the technology there, in collaboration with our national lab that's right here in Oak Ridge. It really does go hand in hand. It's how some of these projects have really gotten on an accelerated path to move forward. And just not the buy-in of our local community, but it was really the buy-in from our governor and our House Representative member, Chuck Flashman. They really stepped forward and making sure that the funds were there certainly from a state level. Governor Lee over the last several years has committed over $50 million to bringing companies in and exposing Tennessee, recruit the companies to Tennessee. He's up that now, and he's moved that to over $60 million to help with energy company recruitment. So the list goes on and on. One of the big things that the city of Oak Ridge has done recently is we have developed a new Oak Ridge Corridor Development Corporation, and it's with regional partnerships to help recruit the new nuclear initiative type companies. With that in mind, you have to understand Oak Ridge has been here since the 40s. We know nuclear. That's what we've done. That's been our business model, DOE's business model in Oak Ridge for many, many decades. It's neat to see the shifts from somebody that's grown up here from the early 70s, have been here. I'm a local businessman. I've been a long-time city council member, now 14 years or so on council. It really is interesting to see how it's come almost like full circle. The energy we had in the 50s and 60s with some of the development of some of the nuclear materials and stuff that we were making then to come full circle around, and some of the decades old technology that we had to remove and replace to allow us to kind of get a clean slate to allow these companies to come forward really has benefited for us in our area, in our community. Right now, we have a number of different projects going on. Our big projects right now is and the secretary had said earlier, Kairos with the Hermes 1 projects now received NRC approval and is under construction. You know, they are actually moving dirt and moving things and building things. Same thing with Triso X. We are actually now seeing dirt move the area to actually start to build, you know, all the infrastructure coming together for that. But it's taken a collaborative effort to do these. Besides Kairos and Triso, we've got Type 1 Energy, which is a fusion project at a now TVA closed coal fire plant. It's going to be repurposed for a fusion project. Nano Nuclear has just purchased a headquarters building here. And not only have they brought in their technology and want to be here and in the area, but they've also enlisted LIS, which is a laser isotope separation project that's going to be here. The big project announced last year, though, that kind of pushed us over the edge and really opened the valve on the funnel, was the announcement of Orano coming in with their $5 billion project. And Orano is one of those projects that will take close to a decade before it's up and running and fully functional. But you have to start laying the groundwork and being able to get all the pieces in play in conjunction and along with the NRC's regulation process. So as this all moves forward, a lot of different moving pieces that are happening in Oak Ridge. One of the big things was the development of our Tennessee Nuclear Energy Advisory Council. That's taken community leaders and business leaders that are in this type of technology all together under an umbrella from the state and say, okay, what do we need to do? How do we feed and continue to move this pipeline forward? There are several projects that are still in the infant stage that we're working in conjunction on, but it's almost like the ripple in the pond approach. Once the first pebble hits the water and the ripples start, more and more pebbles become stones, and those stones become those companies. We're actually seeing the brick and mortar of some of these companies come forward, and that is so critical for us. It allows us as a community to develop and continue to grow. It allows our workforce that's been trained here for decades to move and cross-pollinate onto other companies. Very important for us to go forward.
That's great, Chuck. Thanks. I'm glad you mentioned the laser isotopes too. We'll come back to that topic of just how diverse the advanced nuclear field is beyond just power production. But first, I want to give Kat Clifford a chance to reflect on this question around where we are in terms of American commercial nuclear projects, because I think, Kat, as the senior science and economics correspondent, now at Cipher News, previously at CNBC, you've got a really interesting perspective on this because you're looking at nuclear from the outside in, but also from the perspective of startups and entrepreneurship. So the innovation ecosystem that we just heard John and Diahann and Chuck describe, you have seen kind of from different perspectives in other industries as well. And so I'm looking forward to your perspective as well on new nuclear today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I have been reporting on the nuclear industry pretty much as long as I've been a climate reporter. About the same time I started covering climate and energy full time, I really dove into nuclear. And that's because nuclear is clean energy, right? No greenhouse gas emissions associated with, generating electricity from a nuclear reactor. I always say there's going to be some emissions associated with building one of these construction projects, which is important to acknowledge, but generally speaking, clean energy. And so my perspective sort of started, my perspective on the nuclear story started from that perspective, covering it as a climate story. I think right now the message from the Trump administration that we heard earlier is still really strong on nuclear, probably a little bit more focused on energy independence and meeting the growing demand for electricity, and nuclear does absolutely fit into those narratives just as well, and it's also clean, which is also a benefit. And I think, my role here as a journalist, so I'm unbiased, right? I'm watching the industry, I'm reporting on the industry, but I am not part of it. I think that what everyone has said, it really lays, the table is set. I would say, Chris Wright is saying that the nuclear renaissance begins now. And I would say, from my perspective as an unbiased watcher on this space, the table is set for the renaissance to start, right? You have a lot of interest. You have federal, you do have bipartisan support from many administrations, the Biden administration, the Trump administration. The reason for the focus might be slightly different, but still you see bipartisan support. You see demand for electricity going up and to the right, and we need more energy on the grid. There's a lot of new innovation and technologies being constructed. I also think a big player that we can say that is part of setting this table for the nuclear renaissance is all of the interest and support and investment from hyperscalers, the big tech companies coming in with strong, their voice coming in saying that we need more energy for our data centers. Those are companies that have historically really put a premium on clean energy, and so needing energy for their data centers, needing clean energy for their data centers, and a lot of tech companies bringing money to the table for the nuclear industry. So, but I would also say, and not to be the wet blanket here, but there's dirt moving to get the construction sites started. There's not an actual nuclear reactor being constructed right now. And so, my point of view from this is the table is set. We have so many pieces of this puzzle ready to go. Is the Renaissance actually started yet? Ooh, I don't know. I would say maybe it's about to get started. But I also will say, and I think this is probably not news to anyone who is on this panel, but it takes time. And so some of this is just sort of being realistic and having honest expectations for how long this is going to take. So yes, there's been a lot of movement for a lot of reasons, and it's really exciting to see. I don't know that I would say that the nuclear renaissance is completely underway yet. However, there's a lot of really important steps, pieces of the pieces of the story, and the table is set. And one of the pieces that I'm really glad to be on this call, and I'm going to be learning from fellow panelists as I continue to cover this story, if this renaissance does in fact take off, as we're all watching, the community engagement is going to be a huge part of the story. And that's something that, how communities engage with companies looking to build reactors, new technology, start up old reactors, where are we going to have a permanent waste repository? So that's definitely a part of the story that I haven't covered as much, but I think going forward, I'll be really interested to follow. So thanks for including my journalist perspective in this conversation.
No, I think it's important to recognize, that the table is set. And so what does that mean? What do we need to do next? And I think that an important part of that you touch on, Kat, is the idea that, moving dirt is not the only thing that needs to happen for these holes to be filled with reactors. And so let's talk a little bit about the supply chain that is required for new nuclear. Particularly, we've talked a little bit about microreactors. Dr. Goff mentioned Gen 4 advanced reactors, which would be not light water reactors, but other types of coolants and moderators, different types of fuel that is being designed and will need to be manufactured. Let's talk a little bit, John. Maybe John, you have the best perspective on this, universally in the country, on what is happening right now to really support, and what are these different uses and market sets for light water reactors, SMRs, advanced reactors, microreactors? How do we make them all real?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so great question, and there's so many different vectors that are being pursued here. It's really exciting, and frankly, it's as exciting or more at any time in my 35 plus years in this business. In part because there's now a recognition of the value of nuclear beyond the grid, and of course the use of nuclear to supply the grid and to supply large electricity needs is going to remain foremost in terms of the applications for nuclear. And that, of course, is what's driving a lot of this interest from hyperscalers that's been touched on, as well as from others who are seeking to electrify. And that can go to, the onshoring of manufacturing, for example, that has started and that the Trump administration is trying to accelerate, is just one example of that and what's driving up the forecasts for electricity demand. You've probably seen this for the benefit of folks who haven't. Just over the last couple of years, anticipated growth in electricity capacity has risen something like 5 times. All right. Now, maybe not all of those demand projections turn out to be true, but the point is we're going to need to build new generation at a pace that we just haven't the last several decades because we haven't seen that sort of load growth. On top of that, we now have a rising number of companies that are interested in nuclear as a source of process heat. And so that, of course, is the foundation of the X-Energy partnership with Dow, looking at using both electricity and heat from the X-Energy reactor to help reduce the carbon intensity and power the operations there at Seadrift. We're seeing more and more of that. So more of the companies in the oil, gas, chemical sector are looking at nuclear as a source of both electricity and heat. We're also starting to see a lot more interest in the use of nuclear for off-grid or applications or for provision of very reliable power in remote locations or for military installations, what have you. So quite a bit of growth in the microreactor space to replace the current use of diesels, for example. Think about remote communities or mining locations where you can't really get power. You're shipping in diesel or something, right? Or a military facility where the security of energy supply is really paramount and essential to the ability to fulfill your mission. So on all of those fronts, we're seeing projects go from just sort of the dreaming stage to the doing stage. And so, to the point made earlier, well, yeah, we're moving dirt. We don't necessarily have construction permits for some of these projects, but that's we're taking the necessary steps to get there, right? And so I have a lot of confidence that when we bring this group back together in a couple of years to reprise this seminar, we'll have several projects underway, more in the pipeline, to serve a far wider range of energy end uses than we've ever seen nuclear serve in this country. And you're on mute, Laura. That's usually my job.
Thank you. Thank you. The car alarm has stopped outside now, so I feel that I can continue without going on mute. Diahann and Chuck, I'm curious from your perspective, because your portfolios are so diverse as elected officials, and I'm wondering what kind of Kat mentioned hyperscalers and the end users. Diahann, you mentioned the potato chip manufacturer. What kind of questions are you getting from other commercial energy users, both electricity and heat, process heat users? What sort of interest are you finding from other businesses in your communities as this discussion around nuclear starts to percolate at the state level?
Diahann?
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure. Thank you, Chuck. First and foremost, I just want to disclose I'm not elected, but what we're seeing is a lot of reshoring interest in advanced manufacturing. Powder metallurgy, hot isostatic pressing is an example that's being led by our Clean Energy Supplier Alliance project team. Of course, being the second build behind Dow Energy Northwest partnership with X-Energy, Amazon, we have there's a lot of tentacles into that smaller supply chain that supports. But as Kat mentioned, really timing's the issue. So we've got a little bit of a cart and horse, chicken, egg issue, order book issue. People want to be ready. The robustness of the supplier, making sure they're ISO 9000 certified, making sure that we've got a fit for nuclear program so that when we are ready to pull that lever, we've got the industry and the workforce ready to meet it. It's going to be very critical. And so that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do in the partnership that we're working on with all of our economic development partners. We're primarily in the focus on fuel, component manufacturing, supply chain, again, resilient space. And I'd say we kind of do a little bit deeper dive in partnering with our Idaho friends on fuel and advanced materials. Here, our Pacific Northwest National Lab has phenomenal expertise, and you've got to have that necessary R&D that's moving along with this. So I think Chuck mentioned this, but it's like a clock. We got to make sure that all those components come in at the right timing and pieces. And for us, that's a lot to manage, working with the companies and making sure that there's certainty. So I'd say certainty and timing is really critical. And that's the questions that we get asked a lot by companies that want to be here and be a part of that supply chain. So just again, making sure that they've got a diversified portfolio that includes maybe nuclear, but also maybe have some other elements of fab or advanced materials to ensure that we've got a robust pipeline when the time comes. Chuck?
That's great, Diahann. I think what you described as your sort of fit for nuclear program answers a question that we got in the Q&A around Dr. Goff's mention of a program being community ready. And I'm not aware of a certification that necessarily identifies a community as nuclear ready or a nuclear technology being community ready. But I think what you're describing in terms of really aligning the end users, the local suppliers and vendors, and the workforce in a community are all of the symptoms of being community ready for a technology. Chuck, do you want to add to this topic as well from the Tennessee perspective?
Yeah, certainly from the Tennessee perspective, like Diahann and the people in Washington are doing, it's all about the holistic approach to this ideal. If you look at it strictly from an SMR or a light water reactor type scope, those technologies are going to be important, but it's not just about that. With the talk and discussion and technology of SMR and now micro reactors and even maybe in the future, a nano type reactor type system could come online. It's now becoming more of a tool, not just a process to generate electricity, but this technology now is an applicable tool for industries across a much wider spectrum than what was first originally thought about. It's not just building redundancy and stability in your grid and your grid network with electricity supply, but it's delved much deeper than that. And like Kat had said earlier, with the private equity that's coming into this industry, in just the 4 years that we've had the new nuclear forum going on at ECA, the amount of private equity and the interest from a wide spectrum of people wanting to invest in all of this has really ramped up. You've seen the ramp up from the federal level. States are now starting to see that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've gone from the $60 million we're using to recruit people in the state of Tennessee to Governor Lee put almost $93 million into the building side of it. So what do we have to do to help these companies pass over some of these hurdles with infrastructure they have to lay down to actually be here? Once you start to see that from a federal and state level, now that's where these other companies come in with our companies here in town, with Kairos partnering with Google and with TriSoX partnering with Amazon. These are game changers. These really do bring in these, when they go to look at these investors now, hey, it's not just our money that's online, but it's also the businesses that are here to help kind of bolster that bottom line to these investors. And now they're saying, okay, this needs to move forward. We need to really explain and explore this at the fullest possible benefit. And it really is. I mean, the mindset is here. It's not just a technology, it's a tool that people need to be able to understand and use. And I think that's where it's going to be important from a community standpoint to make sure we understand that. It's not just about putting the next reactor in the ground. It's about what are we going to do with that technology? And is that technology mobile? Is that technology, like John had said earlier, being able to move this to a remote location where you had to, build huge roads to just haul the diesel in for some location. This changes that whole technology, that changes the whole parameters of what they can do in a remote location. It's going to be used in mining. It's going to be used, every industry that has to have an abundance of reliable, steady power is going to benefit from the technologies that are being introduced right now. And as communities, we have to welcome that. What's unique with Washington and the Tri-Cities, the 5 cities area, I hate to say Tri-Cities, it's no longer a 5-city, Tri-Cities, 4 or 5 or 6 cities. But what's happening with the state of Washington, what's happening in the state of Tennessee, is that we had the base already here. The base was here. The community understood it. The community was involved with it as it's grown and gone through the process, and it's matured. DOE's commitment to continue to do cleanup at existing sites, that's viable. You're going to see other communities in other states be able to come into this now that as that cleanup process works across the country, it's going to continue to have that. That's very vital in this process from a community level standpoint.
And Chuck, I think what you're describing is really important because communities are doing it. There's some muscle memory to making this happen. For communities that are newer to the nuclear enterprise and are curious, trying to figure out how they can become part of this next step, be part of the next order book for any of these new technologies, it can be kind of overwhelming when we're talking about light water reactors and SMRs and microreactors, mobile reactors. Suddenly, that's a lot of different types of infrastructure, a lot of different supply chains that start to put a community at a sort of decision paralysis to figure out which way do we go, where do we start, how do we start to engage and learn more. I'm interested in everybody's thoughts on, is it working with the developers? Is it finding the investors? Is it working with the technology companies and the reactor vendors themselves? Is it working through the trade group like NEI? It's where would you suggest, and you might all have different suggestions, where does a community that's new to this start?
Well,
John, you came off. Oh, Chuck?
Yeah, if you'd like me to start, I think it starts with from a community standpoint, you have to bring the community leaders, the movers of the community. They have to communicate well and realize that it's not just themselves are going to bring this forward. It's got to be an approach to, you've got to go get your local support. You've got to get your state support. It's got to be a two-way street. It can't be the state driving this always. The community has to be engaged with the state and say, okay, we're here with, this is what we want to make sure we're engaged in. And how can we get support from the state level? Not only that, but simultaneously, you've got to be talking to your federal representatives because they're going to help move this needle along. And it's at those levels that you're going to have the first initiation from these companies. They're going to kind of, put their toe in the water. Is this community, is this area acceptable to what I want to bring to new nuclear initiatives? And if they are, then if that support, then it starts to move. And that's where the private equities come into play, probably at a higher level, especially in the state of Tennessee with sunshine laws. You don't want to tell in the city of Oak Ridge 7 council members what your plans are. This has got to happen at the city manager level, and then that city manager or organization's got to again come back. The city council or the county executives, elected officials of a local community, can be your biggest advocates and your biggest cheerleaders, but they've got to be brought in at the right time so that it can go through the process.
I'd like to follow up and second everything Chuck just said. Vertical works on project teams. It's not like we have a group meeting and a group think. If you do that, you've got to manage expectations. And a lot of these companies, honestly, we've got like a bunch of horses running a race. We don't know quite who's going to make it through the line, and we're trying to be ready. But it definitely starts with, what does the community seeking? What is its vision? What is the problem it's trying to solve? Does it need jobs for its community? Does it need to diversify its industrial base? Does it need electricity? So the community itself comes first. And from my perspective, always, right? What is the community looking for? And then how do you match that up with the companies and what they're looking for? And then you find the right partners, and it kind of builds from there. John?
Yeah. That stuff's all great. I just wanted to point to a couple of examples, if I could, Laura, just building on what Diahann and Chuck said. One, obviously, folks who are on this webinar are already familiar with ECA, but ECA is a tremendous resource in terms of connecting folks to the types of knowledge that a community is going to want to have as they go down this road. 2 recent examples that worked in fairly different ways, I think, are instructive. One, you had the example of TerraPower, which, they knew roughly where they wanted to build, what they wanted to build, but they didn't have a particular place that they were locked in on. So they engaged a series of communities in a conversation, right? They thought that it would make sense to site their facility at the site of a coal plant that was slated for closure. And so, as folks may know, they engaged 4 communities in Wyoming in a conversation and just went around and explaining what they were looking to do. They didn't, put a pin in a map and then try to defend it. They were really looking to give the communities a chance to learn more and decide if they could see this as being a part of their future. And of course, by the end of that process, you essentially had 4 communities competing to host that facility. So, that went very well. And of course, TerraPower brought in a lot of other folks that weren't tied to the company to help inform that conversation. And so you could see things really going that way. Another example is the state of Louisiana, which is, you may know, under their Public Service Commission, launched an investigation into advanced nuclear and the role that it might play in the state's energy future. And that was driven in large part by big industrial customers in the state that were looking for reliable and increasingly clean sources of power. And the state engaged the Idaho National Lab and the Frontiers Initiative there. And for those who aren't familiar with that program, that's the lab's effort to serve as an honest broker, again, to bring resources to inform the conversation, not trying to drive the community and the state in one direction or another, but to help them really dig into what does it mean to host nuclear energy and potentially welcome advanced nuclear into the state. And so for those who are interested, I'd encourage them to reach out to the INL, or you can reach out to me and I can help make that connection. It's another great resource for helping forming this conversation. And I guess finally, I think my NEI colleagues are pretty good at this sort of thing as well, and helping people understand kind of what it means to be a nuclear host community. And so to the extent that we can be helpful as well, we're more than happy to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as we talk about this, what it means to be a nuclear host community, I would like to talk a little bit more about something that Chuck sort of alluded to with the isotope program, is that it's not just about reactors, right? There's a question in the chat about the shortage of critical minerals or rare earths. And, there's uranium mining in the United States, or there was a history of it. There is fuel fabrication that is being returned to the United States. There's manufacturing. How do we think about, how does that work in terms of both a constraint moving forward as we think about scaling, but also as an opportunity for communities to think about what part of the fuel cycle they might be interested in hosting?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly happy to jump in. Certainly there's going to be a wider range of suppliers involved in servicing this broader range of technologies that's going to come to market. So when we think about the large reactors, the AP1000, for example, they have a supply chain that they got in place as they built reactors here in the U.S. and overseas, and so a lot of that has been established. Although there's certainly a desire to onshore more of that supply chain, although a significant share of it came from the U.S. But as we think about next generation nuclear and some of these smaller and microreactor designs, you're going to have an opportunity to do things like reactor vessel fabrication for the smaller things that we can't do for the bigger ones. Fuel is an excellent example, because we're going to need not just the fuel that we have for today's reactors, but we're going to need what we call high assay low enriched uranium fuel. So fuel enriched to a higher concentration of the isotope of uranium you need for fission. And that's going to create opportunities for not just more enrichment infrastructure in the US, but for uranium conversion infrastructure, for new fuel fabrication. Chuck, really excited about what's going on there at Oak Ridge with the X Energy spinoff, right, for their TRISO fuel manufacturing as one example. And of course, you all have the Framatome fuel fab facility up there, which I think is going to get involved in providing a broader range of fuel products going forward. And then of course, tied to all that are going to be different types of components that you're going to need for, you don't pump sodium in the same way you pump water, for example, right? You're going to need different pumps, different valves, different instrumentation, what have you. Some of that will just be existing suppliers that evolve their offerings to serve, new markets. But some of that might be entirely new companies that come into being. And a lot of the microreactor companies and SMR companies are out there now looking for potential partners. They're also looking for places where they're going to set up shop and do their manufacturing. And so there are opportunities for communities to try to work to attract those types of companies into their regions. And part of it, part of what's going to make a community attractive is going to be workforce. And do you have the ability to either draw from existing workforce or to bring new people in to help fill these roles? And so all of that's going to matter in terms of the ability to attract some of these new industries.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, Lauren, and that where John left off right there with workforce. I mean, that takes time as well. You've got to introduce this, in the state of Tennessee, we're introducing it at the high school level. Being able to understand and mentor and work with the existing workforce. Like any industry, nuclear has to go through the rebirth of their workforce. The trades across America have had a really push over the last 3 to 5 years to reintroduce that to college age students. The trade workforce is something that has to change. This is another trade. This is a much more technical trade, but it's got to be, the interest at the community level and at the state of Tennessee, University of Tennessee, has had like a 5-fold increase in interest in nuclear programs. And then not just a nuclear engineer program, but a much broader scope across this. This is almost like the rebirth of the auto industry after the 73 embargo, and they had to retool their vehicles, you know, and I'm the car guy, so I'm going to bring you a car analogy to it. But, you know, what you saw with the industry, automotive industry, it wasn't just 1 or 2 locations in the country that was doing 90% of the work. They knew they had to diversify and bring that technology and the equipment and the infrastructure they need to ramp up to the next level to across the country. So every part of the country is going to have an expertise or a specialty that they could be involved with. It's recognizing that from a local standpoint and getting the support at the state and federal, say, we have that technology or we have the workforce to handle that technology. What can we do to support that here at this level? So it's critical that communities start, certainly at the community level and at the four-year institutional level, universities, to say, okay, we've got to be introducing the next generation of workforce to this technology. It's not, if not, then they're already a step behind. And in this industry, the way it's going right now, it's not the Wild West, but it is a race. And you've got to be ready to step forward, and you've got to put next step. You know, we get this step in place. What's our next step? And really be working towards that. Be 3 or 4 moves out there ahead of the competition.
If I could just follow up too, again, this is the importance of community vision. This is the importance of the community being at the table early, because workforce and infrastructure take a lot of time, just like building the advanced reactor, maybe not as long as the advanced reactor project, but you know what, it does take a lot of time. So for us in Washington State, we've actually, again, had a great partnership that's been building, and we've partnered not only with the State Department of Commerce, but with PNNL and INL, WSU, the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures, and the Intermountain West Nuclear Energy Corridor Tech Hub in Idaho, Supplier Alliance, and really our R&D partners to really come together. And that's what we're working on this week. We hope to submit next week for the NSF engine for the Nuclear Energy Accelerator Region, or the NEAR. Really, we believe that this brings together, again, the wide-scale collective efforts to accelerate that R&D timeline. We've got experts in both Idaho and Washington that can help accelerate that timeline, bring new innovations and transformation of innovations and entrepreneurship to the table to build some of those smaller components or fill in those gaps and pieces. And then ultimately, we've got workforce. I think we all have pretty robust pipelines of workforce, but we're going, just like Chuck, deep into K through 12 even, making sure that we've got our apprenticeships at the table, making sure we've got our trades partners at the table working with us. So again, that we can meet that need when the time comes, when that company is ready to launch its workforce. And we're really trying to break down those silos, because in addition, Washington and Tri-Cities, we've got the workforce, capable workforce, fantastic trades and skilled workforce, but we also have the abundance of land. So between us and Idaho, we really see ourselves as the Intermountain West corridor. We want to help support the domestic, basically supply chain that needs to be put in place, not only to serve domestic energy needs, but also global energy needs. We're looking big picture, and we're looking for new missions.
Now that, Diahann, you bring up a good point with the regional approach and how that, because I think that one of the workforce challenges has always been how mobile people are willing to be. And a regional approach allows people to stay a little bit closer to home if they want to stay, but be able to excel in a particular sector. Kat, I'd like to bring you into this conversation around workforce, because as an economics reporter and looking at other startup and other industries in the innovation ecosystem, this workforce issue is one that is common. And I'm curious how what you see happening in the nuclear industry compares or contrasts to what might be happening in the battery space or the geothermal space or other emerging technology spaces that are, how are they talking about their workforce issues?
Yeah, thank you. interesting. I just had a story come out today about geothermal, and one of the big selling points that geothermal energy makes, rightly so, I think that's a smart thing for them to do, is that they can really repurpose, and a lot of the skills and technology and a lot of the skills and expertise from the oil and gas sector are almost directly transferable to the geothermal sector. And so that, the robustness of the workforce that we have in the United States in oil and gas is a selling point for the geothermal industry, as being, we already have this as a country, and if we want to invest in geothermal, that's a selling point. I do think that one of the things that I hear in all of my reporting about nuclear, which has been, talked about already by the other panelists, is we need a workforce, that because the sort of the muscles, atrophied a bit for the workforce in nuclear. And so if we're going to launch this renaissance, that we really do need to pay attention to training the next generation of the workforce. One thing that I thought was so interesting is hearing Chuck and Diahann talk about how you're seeing the education, starting early on. And, one of the things that I also will say from my reporting is that the attitudes towards nuclear are very, I think that general attitudes towards nuclear are evolving writ large, but I think you see that even more starkly when you look at different generations. And I think that maybe there's a little bit of some reservations or concerns or fears in sort of my parents' generation and older. But in the younger generation, I think there's a lot of interest and a lot more eagerness and willingness and interest in the nuclear industry, both fission and fusion. I report on both sectors, but and so I think it's really interesting to hear you say that you're talking to that's something that's coming into your school programs, because I do think it's an issue for the nuclear industry.
Sure.
Yeah, I think John, go ahead.
Laura, couldn't agree more with what Kat had to say. And, in attracting and retaining that workforce is going to be essential. And you look at what happened with the Vogtle projects in Georgia, those were completed now, some time ago, and we've seen people move on, right? They move on to other jobs. The best thing we can do in terms of delivering new projects, increasingly timely and affordably, is going to be to get to an order book of new nuclear that's sufficient to retain people within the sector, both in the supply chain companies, but also in the companies that are actually delivering these products and these projects. And so, things that are going to help get new nuclear built, I think, are also going to help us attract the workforce. What folks in the labor community have told me in years past is, you show me the jobs, I'll get you the people for nuclear, because nuclear jobs pay well, right? They're safe for people who work at plants that you can talk about multi-generations working at the same facility. And so these are the types of jobs people want, right? But they want to know that there's some, longevity to these positions. And so one of the things you're going to find us really focused on is ensuring that we retain the types of policy advances we've achieved over the last several years that have really gotten new nuclear into the conversation. So things in the existing tax code, like clean energy credits that actually value nuclear on par with wind and solar in a way that's never happened before. The loan program office, which is going to provide low interest rate financing for projects. These capital intensive projects, the interest rate really matters, right? And so things like that are going to make a big difference in our ability to get some of these projects off the ground, get to that order book, and create the conditions in which we can attract and retain that workforce.
That's a great point, John. And I think you've teed up a couple of questions that I still want to get to, but I see we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A on the NRC and the role of regulation. So I do want to address this idea of, with the new reactors that are being planned, how does that NRC licensing, how is the NRC dealing with the different types of reactor designs, the different fuels, the support? When we talk about this diversity of options, how is the NRC dealing with that? Is that going to affect the timeline? And I think then it really ultimately comes down to that question of public trust as well. Like, what do we think the communities are looking for to understand these new technologies and the role of the regulator, particularly with an emphasis of the states really driving some of these projects now? So sorry, that was like 3 or 4 questions, but John, you look like you're ready to dive in.
Well, I can hit a couple of those points. I mean, as an industry, of course, the existence of a technically credible, competent regulator is important. And so, we were really happy to see what Congress did with the ADVANCE Act to send, the message to the NRC that Congress is looking for a more efficient, risk-informed approach to regulation. We've seen some promising signs. The NRC, for example, turned around a subsequent license renewal application that they originally thought was going to take 24,000 person hours to complete. They did it in 14,000 because nuclear license applicants actually pay for the NRC reviews. That actually saved the applicant about $3 million. So, I mean, we're seeing movements in the right direction. There are other examples I could cite. The issue is, these are kind of one-offs, and when we get to the scale of new applications that we expect to see, that's where the challenge is going to be. I do think the new chair and the commission recognize that they've got a challenge that they need to respond to, and are trying to gear up to make that happen. The licensing process, for example, for microreactors, reactors where it's demonstrably, there just isn't much of a potential for offsite consequences. That ought to be significantly sped up. And we, for example, if you look at the existing NRC regs, it would be about a 5-year process to go from identifying the need for a microreactor to the ability to get one in place. We think that should be able to be done in less than a year, maybe 6 months. Okay, some of that is getting rid of things that don't make sense. Some of that's doing things in parallel that they might otherwise do in series. But we've issued that challenge in effect to the NRC in the form of a 400 or 500 page proposal. They haven't identified any showstoppers to why that couldn't happen. And so, we're going to continue to engage with them to try to find ways to drive more efficiency into that process without compromising safety. And we think it can be done.
Great.
Laura, I would just add that, it's critically important that we engage with the NRC in the early steps. As they see this technology start to come around and they actually get engaged with that, I think the developers and the companies that are engaging with them early are going to have the one up on other companies that are just going to go through the due process. They're going to have to say, okay, we understand the need for a shorter turnaround. We're no longer doing the traditional model in nuclear. The large powerhouse nuclear reactor type deal that took a 20-year process for them to go through. Why it took 20 years to build, it seemed to go hand in hand. They realize now with the technology and the advancement of the technology that the production process is going to be a much smaller scale and a much quicker scale. And so they're going to have to change their thought process of how they're looking at this, not to take any shortcuts on the regulation side, but that regulation process. Is this something that, and so here in Tennessee, the Tennessee Valley Authority has been working very early on with NRC to work with the SMR project that we're working at the old Clinch Breeder reactor site from years ago. And there's been a lot of movement and a lot of things that they've been able to streamline through that. It's a learning curve. They're going to have to learn. Each one of these they do, and as comes along, they're going to get faster, more efficient at it. And as long as we have the support of them going forward, I think this really helps. A very good example of that was how engaged environmental cleanup of our existing sites have gone with EPA. EPA's approach at this was a very slow, almost sloth-like approach before. And as the cleanup process engaged up and got really ramped up and working, we've seen a much better cooperation between EPA and the cleanup companies going forward through the cleanup process. I think you're going to see the same thing with NRC as these technologies come on and these companies come up and say, okay, here we are. We need to go through this process, and let's get through the process as quickly as possible.
Chuck, you and Diahann have both talked about land transfers. Do you think that that cleanup process happens faster when there's a clear use case for the land?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if they, because I think you see from a federal point of view that this, ultimately that's what they want to do. Ultimately we want environmental cleanup to be out of a job. We want that workforce. That workforce is going to be important, but we need them to work themselves out of a job. And as we see that, I certainly think that's it's going to be quicker, because we can then use that, from a city council point of view, that land is taxable income. It helps the community, it helps the counties, the cities in our area, help us to provide all the necessary infrastructure that we need to make sure the workforce is enjoying the place in which they're working. Hopefully they live in the same area. It's going to be vital for that.
Quick follow-up, if I could, to both Chuck and John's comments. IIJA, as John mentioned, has the provisions to expedite those federal reviews, reduce the permitting delays. But I think the key here is the interest in private sector investment. NRC, as Chuck mentioned, is going to learn as they go along, but it's that private sector investment that also wants a private sector return. So I think we also got some technology disruptions that we haven't talked about. There's possibility of some AI review that could be put in play there to help the reviewer. The whole public-private partnership approach, it's got to be really innovative. It's got to be flexible. We got to keep supporting NRC. They do a great job. We need sustainable models, but it's got to be balanced. The public interest has got to be balanced with private sector efficiency, because those private investors are going to want to see results, and that we cannot wait.
Yeah, one of the questions in the chat is regarding how do we make sure these new reactor facilities have a high capacity factor, high availability, and I think that speaks to that demand is there, and it reminds me too that let's talk more about that public-private partnership, and how do you think that's changing at this point in time? What new examples of public-private partnership do we have?
If I could, I'd say that what I just explained on the NSF engine grant is an approach to that they are looking for a sustainability model going forward. It's not just government-led. They want to see the coalition. They want to see the private sector investment. They want to see advancements. So again, it's that balanced approach. You've got to have a model that's really kind of set in place for the long haul, that's not just dependent upon federal and state dollars, but it's collaborative. And it's also got to be flexible. You got to be able to move with whatever the market is demanding and whatever opportunities in front of you from an innovation perspective. Or I think there's a lot of pieces that we don't understand that are missing in the supply chain, that are elements that we might not have that we need to fill in, and we need to be able to fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
I would add this. It comes down to our ROI, the return on investment. Private equity is going to want at some point some type of return. If we're building a traditional nuclear model, it's a 30-year or 50-year return on investment. This technology and the way we're looking at from SMR and micro reactors, it's a much shorter scale. I mean, this could start your return on investment 10, 15, 12 years out. You could be looking at some type of return on that investment. And that's going to generate even more buzz as more private equity companies come in and drive that. I think you're going to see the term of a return on investment much shorter.
Chuck, it's not only time, cost, schedule, right? Return on investment, but what's the cost of that utility at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
What can we be doing to help build the efficiencies into these new units that help drive that cost lower, that keeps it competitiveness across the board with all the above energy strategy?
Yeah.
And Chuck, Dan, I'll be interested in what you all are hearing. Certainly when it comes to some of the bigger utilities and the bigger plants and even the SMRs, there's a real desire that I see to move forward to serve this, the AI demands and other types of new demand we talked about. There is a concern about what we call tail risk, cost and schedule risk for first of a kinds or the first few of a kind. And people look at the Vogel experience, for example, and they say we've got to be careful not to put that on the ratepayers. And so folks are looking at ways of sharing that risk. And one of the things that has come to the fore is the idea of some sort of a federal cost sharing. So this, Laura, goes to your point about public-private partnership, some sort of a federal role in helping to address the early of a kind risks, we'll call it, for the first few of a new build while we move our way down the cost curve. I think that sort of thing could be an important add-on to what's being done between private and public actors right now to help build confidence necessary to build the first few of a kind and get us to a sustained program of new build in the U.S.
No, that's great. Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah, and to that, I just really wanted to call out the governors both in Tennessee and Washington. They put their money where their mouth is on this, and they've made it clear to potential federal partners and private sector partners that the states are committed, right, to the point of putting forward real money to help enable next of a kind nuclear projects. So I think that really helps build confidence both among the private sector and the federal actors that money would be money well spent in those in states, and we're seeing others doing it as well.
No, that's true. I want to remind people that we have the Q&A. If they have questions that we haven't gotten to yet, to please put them in the chat. I think we've been trying to move through those. But I want to come back to this definition of public-private partnership and how it's changing, because one aspect of that is the public-private partnership regarding used fuel and the DOE's responsibility on it. And Diane, I see you're smiling. We've got to ask the question, what about the waste? Because that does influence private sector's interest in participating. And I think we've seen some changes in recent years where it is seen more as an opportunity than a liability. So who would like to, John, you want to?
So folks on this call have probably heard more from me on this topic than they care to, and I'm happy to opine on it in a minute, but I'm really interested to hear what Kat has heard in her reporting regarding the way that public and private actors are thinking about this in the context of new nuclear.
In the about nuclear waste or about public partnerships?
Is it standing in the way of building new nuclear? Is it a real concern at the state and local level? That sort of thing.
I mean, it definitely comes up. I'm trying to think of like a particular example or a particular, I don't know if I can come up with a particular conversation or a particular interaction I've had with a state about this, but I do think that writ large, the question of a long-term repository for nuclear waste is something that does come up, and that is definitely I think there's sort of a an education issue here, which one of the things that I've learned from doing all my reporting on nuclear over the last however many years is that even though we don't have a permanent repository for nuclear waste in the United States, and we were pretty close with Yucca Mountain, but that didn't work out, that the way we are storing interim waste is safe, right? That there isn't a risk in the way that we're storing interim waste. There hasn't been an incident with the way that interim waste is being stored. However, I don't think that I don't know that that's an answer that most of the public who is not really well versed in nuclear is going to understand or understands right now. I think and that is part of being a reporter on the nuclear industry. You hear from the experts, and then you also hear from people who are not part of the industry. And I do think that there is a huge gap in the understanding of the risks of nuclear waste, and the fact that we don't have a permanent repository, the fact that we do have a solution that is so far not creating any problems. And I always like to bring up in my reporting on the issue that we don't hold the nuclear industry by the same standards that we hold the fossil fuel industry, right? That there's always this question about nuclear waste in the nuclear industry. And yes, I definitely hear that in my reporting. What are we going to do? But the same question is not asked of fossil fuel waste. And so again, I think what I could say is that there's I do think there's an education and communication gap there right now. One other thing I wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish the thought.
Well, I wanted to make a point previously when we were talking about the NRC and increasing the speed of, getting regulations, getting applications approved. This is also sort of just a little bit of a bigger picture observation that comes from, I do a lot of reporting on nuclear, but I also report on other parts of the energy landscape. And I think that there's also a lot of energy and focus on increasing the efficiency in other parts of permitting in the energy landscape. So, for example, one of the areas that I have covered pretty extensively is transmission, and getting transmission built in this country is like herding 17,000 cats into one, little Christmas box or something. So I think, and the pressure that's mounting to get new energy on the grid to meet the AI demand, I think that is adding that's adding a new spotlight, that's adding new focus from on our ability as a nation to permit and regulate efficiently. So I know that was a little bit of a change of topic from the nuclear waste comment, but I also did want to say that I think writ large, the question of increasing our efficiency, of working together, of doing effective but more efficient permitting is a question that cuts across many different industries right now.
Kat, to that point about transmission, one of the things nuclear has going forward is the ability to generally, build where the load centers are, and so you avoid the need for that long distance transmission, which makes life a lot easier. Back on the question of waste, Laura, to your question, we're not seeing it standing in the way of new project proposals now, but of course, a lot of those are at existing plant sites where waste is already safely managed. So it's an easier conversation to have. Or you're looking at communities like coal plant communities who know what it is to be an energy community. They deal with a different form of waste. And so that's been less of an issue. I do think, over the longer term, it's going to be very important to have a credible back end program to help address some of these legitimate concerns for the long term.
I love Kat's conclusion, though, that if our solution is to contain it, control it, and keep counting it, it's a pretty good solution. I think that the nuclear industry really can be held out as an example that would maybe, you'd lose your climate beat, Kat, if we were doing it that way across the energy sector. We only have a couple minutes left, and I think we've gotten to as many of the questions as we can in the 2 minutes we have left. I want to thank everybody for your questions on the Q&A. There's a question here about DoD leading the way by powering their facilities with nuclear. I think that's a good question we'll have to come back to. You can join us in Idaho Falls for the New Nuclear Forum later this month. We'll be able to have these conversations there and continue to dig into these issues. But in a couple words, let's just go around here so you all get a final word in about what you think, what gives you the most excitement about the current momentum that we have, or what do you think we need to really focus on to get there, to really deliver these projects? I'll let you choose.
I'll go.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Diahann.
I'm really excited about the opportunity for innovation, to be quite honest. Back to the waste question, you got companies like Curio, you got Zeno Power. We need a diversified portfolio of opportunities and options, and I think we have a lot of them ready to go. Utah, for example, WIP in New Mexico, those are great facilities that can be leveraged in the interim term. But I'm really most excited about the opportunity for our community, our Intermountain region, to have new missions to really solve something that's not just local, it's domestic, it's global, and really it's like our moonshot. So thank you.
Thanks.
Quickly, Lauren, I would add that we have to continuously look at this opportunities across the whole chain of events in this type of technology. The communities that can diverse themselves across the full supply chain, the communities that can develop themselves and be open to the technology and being able to let those percolate and let those incubate and grow are going to be the ones that are going to be involved with new nuclear initiatives. And so, Oak Ridge is open. We're open for business, and we want that business.
We're happy to partner with you, Chuck. Over here in Washington and Idaho.
Gotcha.
I would say two things. From my perspective, even in the time I've been covering nuclear, which is not forever, the awareness and the conversation has increased exponentially. And so, I think when I first started reporting on nuclear, I was sort of a little bit more of an oddity, and now it's much more widespread. And so I think, just as an observation from my point of view, that's really a reason for optimism and interest in the story. And then the last thing I would say is the fact that I think the increasing energy demand is really made the narrative across, no matter who you talk to in any kind of energy sector, if they're really serious about meeting energy demand. And as from a climate perspective, I'm obviously really interested in decarbonized solutions, including nuclear. But the fact that the energy demand is increasing means pretty much anyone you talk to, they're going to say we need, if they're serious about, in my opinion, if they're serious about meeting energy demand, they're not picking one over the other. We need all of the above. And I think that collaboration and sense of all of the above, more now as soon as possible, is also a reason for optimism for nuclear, but also a real big challenge.
Thanks. John.
Laura, I just add this. The demand for new nuclear is there. The technology is ready or darn close. There's a recognized value of nuclear that's never existed across my 35 plus years in this business. If we can just get the state, federal, and market policies right, don't lose the gains we've made, and just a couple of other things that I think are going to get us to that order book and sustain new build that's going to take us into the next generation of nuclear in the U.S. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. And thanks to all of you for doing what you've done.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank our panelists for this great conversation. We ran a few minutes over. I know there's a lot more to discuss, and we will continue to do so at ECA. And hopefully we'll see you in Idaho Falls, or check us out online. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today, and tune in for future events. Thanks.
Thanks, Howard. Bye.